is that when you went and typed in Google, should I buy? What came up next was Tesla. So if you really start thinking about that, right, breaking that down fundamentally, you think you have control and the awareness when it's Google is throwing in your face, should I buy Tesla? And what comes right after the Tesla is that Google then throws up its stock price. And so that fear of missing out, I think, is only increased exponentially. Why shouldn't I be buying Tesla? Now you start judging yourself. Now you start questioning yourself. Now you start thinking about it. Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? And I think that's, again, goes back to being aware of your situation and understanding what your strategy and what your tactic is going forward, because then it allows you to help navigate that noise. Welcome to Critical Thinking Required, hosted by LBW. This podcast is intended for free thinkers, entrepreneurs, and knowledge seekers. Join us as we discuss relevant financial topics, explore with guests their financial journeys, and engage with experts in industries such as space, media and entertainment, real estate, and many more. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. Welcome to Critical Thinking Required. You're with your host, myself, Tim Bickmore, and my colleague, Dan Weiss. Before we get started into our topic today, I just want to give a little bit of an announcement like I always do, which is if you really like our content, please subscribe, like, and share it. We really would appreciate it. We're just trying to help out, educate people on the art of finance. Welcome back to Critical Thinking Required, episode 2 of Self-Imposed Financial Tragedies, Why and What Not to Do. Before we start episode 2, we wanted to mention that we received comments and insights on our first episode, and they were very well taken, and they were definitely heard. And what we wanted to say is that this is a very difficult subject. It's very subjective. There's a lot of emotions that come with this potential discussion. And that is exactly why we wanted to talk about it, as that's not talked about enough because it is difficult. But what we also wanted everybody to know who's listening and viewing this is that everybody here at LBW goes through the exact same decision-making processes and the motions that come with really complex decisions. And that's why we wanted to talk about it, to create awareness around it. We are not trying to point fingers. We are not to shame. We're not trying to make people feel guilty. We're not trying to make anybody feel feelings. But what we're trying to do is to create reflection, introspection, and awareness around a difficult topic that we feel should be talked about within this industry. So with that being said, please enjoy the next episode of Self-Imposed Financial Tragedies, Why and What Not to Do. And please keep sending the comments and insights, as we always appreciate our listeners being engaged. Thank you.
Great. Those are great thoughts, Tim. I mean, we see it together all the time. And I think that kind of covers a couple others too that we see too. I mean, there is a vulnerability factor that Tim just referred to, an instability that we often see because people are, they're afraid of missing out, FOMO.
Yeah.
Where it's a herd mentality driving something. That the tragedy is that you have this opportunity because you've done well, that you can perhaps allocate capital to different things, and yet you don't necessarily have the awareness to place that capital allocation in something that makes sense to you, because you drive it somewhere else simply because you can, not because maybe it makes sense or it has actual value to you. Is it in itself? One that I'm going to kind of touch on and kind of throw back to Tim, because we were talking about this and he brought up a great example I think he could share. And this may sound crazy, but saving too much can actually be a tragedy.
Yeah, that's, it's so funny in our job. Dan and I get this all the time. Our clients come to us, you're going to hate us. We spent too much this month, or we spent too much in the last 6 months, or whatever it may be. And Dan and I laugh every time. I'm like, well, let's take a look, right? Let's see what's going on. Let's look under the hood and see if it is. Typically, it's never really the case. And yeah, they'll have, our clients will have increase in spend here and there, and it's natural. And it's this idea that we feel so guilty about spending money, right? And I think there's some really good reasonings for why that is, because if you spend too much and you don't make enough, you can get into real financial vulnerability, like I just talked about. It's a very real thing. But you can have the exact opposite approach, right? Everything is a balance and everything is a pendulum. If you swing that pendulum too far to the right and you become so non-aware of your saving habits, is what you could miss out on is you could miss out on life. And to be very honest, one of the things within our job is what it, I think, repeatedly teaches me, and I try my best to take it in as much as I can, is life really is short. And there is tragedies in life, and you do have to take it day by day, and you have to try to be as present as possible for the moments that you have, because we have witnessed people that unfortunately die at early ages, die unexpectedly, and that happens. That is part of life. And so what's really tragic is when this happens and people save and save and save, but they delay life. And one of the best examples that I have ever heard, and I tell people this all the time, it's one of my favorites. We always go to Berkshire Hathaway, and everyone knows us, knows we talk about value investing and Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. And we love to go listen to those guys speak. But to be honest, like, we've heard them say the same thing a lot over times and times. And so in those meetings, guests come up and they talk and they have a question for Warren or for Charlie. And this little boy who is, I think, I don't know, Dan, he's probably 12, gets up and he asks this phenomenal question. He said, guys, he's like, Charlie and Warren, I want to be better. I want to learn how to have better delayed gratification. So for our listeners, if you're not aware of what delayed gratification is, it's to delay the gratitude of something, right? So delay the joy of something. They did studies on kids where they would give them cookies, and the kids who would sit back and not eat their cookies were actually more productive in life. Where the kids who would eat them, and what they would get is, if they would have waited, they would have got another cookie, right? It's delayed gratification. So overall, he asked, how can he be better at that? Because Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk a lot about delayed gratification and being patient. And he asked this to him, and Warren Buffett, with his wisdom, and I was very surprised, gives him this answer. He goes, okay, let's say that you want to go and buy a ticket to Disney World. And let's just say that Disney World ticket is $30 today in today's value. And let's say that you can go, the treasury, which isn't true, but let's say the treasury bill, or the 30-year treasury bill, is at 3%. It's like that pretty much would hold inflation, theoretically, historically speaking. So let's say you delay going to Disney World because you want to save that money. You put that money in the treasury bond. He said, in 30 years, that ticket will be worth X, and you'll have X amount, and you'll be able to buy that ticket. And he said, you should just go to Disney World. That's what his answer was. It was the most beautiful answer for a little kid I've ever heard. And what essentially he is saying is, you should just do it. You have the ability to do it. Why delay that enjoyment for tomorrow? Where people misrepresent delayed gratification is when they don't have the ability to spend it today. And so I'll go back, which means you have to really understand your awareness for your situation. One of our clients, who I always repeat, is it's, how do I live my life, right? How do I YOLO, but be realistic about it? And the way that you do that is being aware of your financial situation and understanding, when you save for that goal, what we find out is all of a sudden our clients saying, like, I don't want to spend my money now. And we're like, oh no, you're going to do it. The goal is there. Go ahead. I don't want to do it, Tim. I don't want to see my savings accounts go down. Then why did we do this? There was no point. If you can't enjoy why you did something, there's a goal, it should be achieved. You should then enjoy it, because where also people don't recognize all the time is that it's not the return on your dollar. It's also the return on your enjoyment, your happiness, and how you live life. And that could be significantly greater than more money. Mm-hmm. It's just a fact. But you have to do it in a way that's not disruptive or destructive to yourself. And that can be very hard, which comes back to being aware and financially literate on your subjective side, knowing, and then enjoying it, where you can't just go on a trip and be like, I feel so guilty about this because, like, I'm spending all this money. No, you saved it. You did it. Like, You gotta remove those emotions. And this can happen on a very large case where people will retire, people will die with millions of dollars. Dan and I were talking about this earlier. The Millionaire Next Door book, which I actually haven't read and I probably need to, I believe is about a gentleman who saves all this money and ends up giving it a lot of away to, I think, a library in this town, I believe is what the end of the book, I think is what he ended up doing. I think he went to like a local library or something in like a local community, and they did a study on it. But what is so frustrating to me about that book is no one examines what the life, like, what is his life like? What did this person do? Yeah, you could have millions of dollars by the time that you die. But what if you don't spend any of it? What if you don't spend it on your kids? What if you don't spend it? Then what's it all for? Why did you do it? What's the point? And if there's no point, that's a tragedy. That's a legitimate tragedy that you have saved too much and you didn't get to enjoy what you had today, now on this earth. And I think people get so stuck in the idea of financial destruction, poverty, not having enough, not being able to be sustainable, which is very real. But there's the other pendulum where it's like, this could also be very real. And if your overall goal, like I would say Warren Buffett is to have a check mark and his number is just to have a dollar amount that his value is worth, that fulfills him. That fulfills one person. And I can tell you that everybody else would be like, yeah, I think I just buy that jet, quit, retire, buy a golf course, golf every day. Like, I don't want to do any of that. So that is the one for the saving too much. But the thing too about a lot of that, and I think where people start having conversations, and as like I was mentioning, is really kind of going back to the idea of this vulnerability, instability, and influence of others, right? Where sometimes, and this is kind of our next topic, where sometimes people get influenced by social media, people get influenced by their parents, people get influenced by a multiple of things. And so, Dan, I'm going to throw this one back at you in like what you've seen. And we've talked about this in a podcast about FOMO, fear of missing out.
I mean, I think it interrupts your typical way your brain thinks. It drives emotion to the top of your thought process, and you don't think so clearly. You know, it's like an argument. When we get into an argument about something and we start getting deep into our emotions about it, the anger or frustration can be blinding. FOMO does the same thing. So, and believe me, we have seen a lot of this, especially in the last 3 years. And that it just maybe because it makes sense for one person doesn't mean it makes sense for you. It also means sometimes that that the tragedy is that you perhaps maybe do something you don't understand. That doesn't usually end up well because you're only relying now on luck. And that's the only thing you got to count on. Where we see it a lot of times too, kind of a similar concept is applying what others do to your scenario when those factors don't apply to you, right? FOMO can drive that. We also see that outside of FOMO, and that itself is a major tragedy.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, everybody is unique. Tim and I we talked about this right before the podcast. He was speaking to somebody who just reached out for some help, and we decided to just give some help there. It's everybody thinks that their life is more basic than what it is, and they think that it is more commonplace than what it is as well. We're all very actually unique, and our finances tell that same narrative. And so what someone else is doing doesn't necessarily mean you should do it. They could be in an entirely different scenario. You may not have all of that uncovered to begin with. They might have X, Y, and Z and might be up to their eyeballs in debt. You just simply don't know. It could be a taxation piece and they're telling you to do something when in all reality, that has a counter effect on you, but not on them perhaps. Maybe it does on them and they don't even understand it. So it really gets people into a lot of hot water when they simply try to do something else to mirror something, whether they've been told to or not. What works for someone else just doesn't work for necessarily you. Stop caring about what works for them and start caring more about what works for you.
2 comments on that too. And what's crazy, I've been reading this new book, and it's kind of driving about desires. And they talk specifically about the market. And this kind of goes into the FOMO comment that Dan had. And the thing I never really had thought about, but Tesla, in I think a couple of years back, it was like 2019, 2020. I don't remember exactly the time frame, but had a really big spike up in price. And I think somebody had done some research on like what had happened. And this is just an example of like the idea of the information age and where we're at, is that when you went and typed in Google, should I buy? What came up next was Tesla. So if you really start thinking about that, right, breaking that down fundamentally, you think you have control and the awareness when it's Google is throwing in your face, should I buy Tesla? And what comes right after the Tesla is that Google then throws up its stock price. It's going up. And this is not any longer your taxi driver saying, hey, you should buy Tesla. This is no longer your golfing buddy. This is now on the internet in your face 24/7. And so that fear of missing out, I think, has only increased exponentially. Why shouldn't I be buying Tesla? Now you start judging yourself. Now you start questioning yourself. Now you start thinking about it. Should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? And I think that's, again, goes back to being aware of your situation and understanding what your strategy and what your tactic is going forward, because then it allows you to help navigate that noise if you should or shouldn't be doing it. And I'm not saying you should or shouldn't, I'm saying more of understanding if your decision is to be made, which brings me to my second comment, which Dan brings up very astutely, is that everyone's decisions and situation is different. And if you really want to talk to somebody about their financial decisions or anything investment, don't ask about the outcome. Don't ask about how much money they got. Ask about the decisions they made. Why did you make that decision? How did you come to that conclusion? What was all the information? Why did you end up saving that on taxes? Do you know how you did that? What was at play? What wasn't at play? If you start asking those questions, you'll probably start finding out how people think. And maybe that's somebody that you want to follow from a framework. Like, oh, I like how you think about that. I like how you deciphered that. I like how your decision tree was kind of aligned with my values, right? But not to say like, how much is that car? How did you, how did you get that? Or I want that. Like, no, ask, well, did you loan it? Is it a lease? What are those lease terms? Why did you buy it? Well, we had to upgrade because we had another kid. Oh, like, it's like all of a sudden you start understanding the decision making and you understand why people are starting making those decisions. And it may alter what you think about their decision making. Mm-hmm. But that's really what you want to focus on, is not the outcome or what they have. You want to ask, well, how did you get there? And what were the process and steps to get to said outcome?
Yeah. And I think it's important to ask them, what do they sacrifice? Like, what were the true costs, not just the monetary costs?
Yes.
What went into this to begin with?
That is that is a question that you ask any founder, right, of a business. Everybody wants to be the business owner, but you could ask anybody who's done it, or anything. Ask an athlete who's performed at the highest level. Ask a business person who's performed. Ask a musician, what did you actually sacrifice to get to where you're at? What did you actually do? Oh, I practiced every day with the violin, 12 hours a day, nonstop for years. Are you willing to do that? I don't know if I am.
Depends on what it's worth to you.
Exactly. Dan, this question I actually am really excited to ask you, because this is one of your favorites and it comes from a very good book that everybody should read. It's very simple. When is enough? And I actually want to reframe it as, what is enough?
Yeah, that is my favorite. This is, I guess in a sick way, my favorite tragedy to dig deeper into. Man, do we see this a lot. Never gets talked about. So what Tim is referring to, and we recommend this book, particularly I recommend this book a lot over the last probably 2 years, the book called The Psychology of Money. It's written by Morgan Housel, I think is how you say his last name, Housel. It's referring to, inside this book, a party. So this hedge fund manager is hosting this book, and one of his guests is an author by the name of Joseph Heller, who wrote a really popular book, maybe it was 70 years ago, called Catch-22. And the hedge fund manager makes a comment somewhere along the lines of, hey, I made more money in a single day, I think today, in a single day, than you did probably the entire time that you were in the height of this popular novel being published. And the author responds back, thinks about it for a second, and responds back and says, yes, but I have something that you will never have, or he will never have. And pauses, and the answer is enough. And I remember that because I see it all the time. What's enough? And the tragedy is that most of us don't know what enough is. And so what ends up happening is you get to the point where you just don't know when to stop. When do you stop accumulating? Do you need to keep doing that? What's going to fill that void? To what point? Does the void ever actually get filled? Because for a lot of us, it doesn't. And so I think out of all the things we've said, like this may be one of the most ultimate or more so awareness exercises for one to apply to their finances is pull out all of the noise and all of the influences. And to you, what point are you satisfied as to what enough is? And I think there's a lot of peace and harmony if you can figure out what that looks like. Because I'll tell you right now, that hedge fund manager, he's right. Never going to find money to bring happiness to that person. Money rarely actually does that anyways, but that's not something that they're actually going to attain because it's not about the money. It's just never simply going to be enough. That person's always going to be dissatisfied. That author, on the other hand, sounds like that person's explored that. Where they are with the monetary situation might be a lot less than this person, this hedge fund manager, but in more ways, I think it's actually more.
I love that. And I think that it's a challenge for everybody that's listening to try to understand what enough is. And enough changes, I think, too. I want people to understand that that's not an absolute answer. It's a relative. I think it's a fluid answer over time. But I also really like it because it really emphasizes something we talk about a lot, that people always think that I'm kind of crazy when I say it, but wealth is relative. What is enough is relative because it's relative to the individual. It's relative to the situation. Being rich, having a lot of money is an absolute idea. Mm-hmm. You can define that. Bill Gates, he rich. Elon Musk, he rich, right? Like that's pretty evident. But we have some clients that aren't even close to that, and they're doing everything they want to do. And they're also rich. Different way. Call them very wealthy, right? Because rich, absolute. It's all fun. So you can define wealthy. One of I'll even throw my dad probably in here really quick, and maybe he will like this or won't like this. He listens to our podcast all the time. So shout out to you, Dad. I'd probably define my dad as pretty wealthy. My dad does not have a lot of money. My dad moved to a third world country. But I think my dad has understood, and he's gone through his own probably situation and tragedies in different ways. But I think my dad doesn't understand what enough is for him. And I respect the hell out of that. But he's not rich, but he's definitely wealthy. He's had to sacrifice a lot for it. And so it really is dependent on the individual. It is the eye of the beholder. This really is the case. And I think Dan is right. Like, if you can understand that, you can empower yourself. But to understand that, it's not always the most fun because it's not about the money. It's about what fulfills you. It's about what your values are. It's about what you want for your life. It's about not looking at others. And to be honest, it's difficult. It's a really hard task because sometimes it's not fun to truly stare in the mirror. It's not.
Well said, Tim. I'm gonna toss one back to you too. So and give a little bit of a piece to it. So we've talked actually quite a bit in this podcast about a tragedy being influenced by others, and sometimes you're influenced by self. And so one of the things we talk a lot about is incentives on our podcast and in our practice. We also talk a lot about biases, and so there are tragedies that those can lead to. Tim, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, biases are very real. It's a very interesting study. Like I talked about a little bit earlier on the podcast about behavioral economics, there has been a lot of studies done on the way that we behave and make decisions, our decision-making processes. And what researchers have found is that we don't always make the most rational decisions given rational information because we have inherent biases. A good one that I really like a lot is the endowment effect. The endowment effect essentially states that if you own a possession, you value it more than somebody who does not own it. And it's been proven within it. Now, they don't understand why we do it. But overall, the thought process is, for example, my house. I own my house. My house is worth 500,000. There's no way that seller should be asking for 450. It's worth 500,000. Well, it's worth 500,000 because you own it. It's yours. It's your possession. And that makes you feel like it's worth more than what the market's actually probably willing to pay for it. It's a real bias. There's recency bias. There's a lot of different cognitive biases that affect us in our decision making. And what's hard is it's again, not trying to change yourself or trying to trick yourself into anything. It's more of being aware that we do have inherent biases, and it's important to understand that, because if you can be aware of it, you can start catching it and you can start slowing down. I really like, I'm not a neuropsychologist or anything like that, but I really like Danny Kahneman. He wrote a book called Think Fast and Slow. I think Fast or Slow, Think Fast and Slow, I believe is the title of the book. And he talks about system 1 and system 2 thinking. System 1 is intuitive thinking, so you're thinking fast. System 2 is deep thought. We use our brains in different ways, in the sense that system 1, we're really quick at it. It's really nice. It's convenient. System 2 is a little bit harder because you have to process information longer. And if you actually think about it, if you ever have talked to a therapist, for example, they'll always say, how about you just sit in those emotions, those feelings for a minute? Let you just sit back and relax in it. It's very uncomfortable. It's never fun, especially if you're anxious, you're nervous, you're stressed. But what it allows you to do is absorb that information and really start thinking in that deep thought process to calm yourself back down to make a decision. I really like the behavior of saying like, hey, I really want to buy this. Maybe you look at it and walk away for it for a day. If you're still thinking about it the next day, hey, that's something that you really want. So there's different tactics that you can use to trick yourself into making more rational decisions and giving yourself the space to make rational decisions. For example, it's like, I think one client a long time ago came to us and they said, hey, I walked out on my porch and I looked down my left and I looked down my right, and there was this play set. Dan, you probably remember this. And there's this play set, and it was a play set that everybody has, but this play set was really expensive. And he's like, and to be honest, guys,
The rainbow play set.
I just wanted to buy the rainbow play set. And he's like, and I knew it. I knew that I shouldn't want to buy it. But all I could think about is that everybody else, and I don't have the rainbow play set. That happens to rational, normal people. It happens. But to be aware of it is really important, because either A, you go ahead and buy the rainbow play set, or B, you know what? This is really not my thing. Nor do I think that my kid cares if I have a rainbow play set or not. And I don't really care. They can spend the money on that rainbow play set. It just depends. So that awareness is extremely important, and it happens day to day, in and out. So that is just a few of the inherent actions. Is yourself is not allowing you to do things that are considered rational. But really quick, we got 2 things left, Dan, before we can kind of close this baby up. So we got the ones these are really good. I like the spending because you couldn't do it before. And I think we should hit on that one too. And I think you should on both of these, by the way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on, again, spending because you couldn't do it before. And now that you have it, you don't want to lose it. I think you have a really good perspective on these two. So you take those away.
Yeah, happy to. And, and maybe that's a whole nother podcast in itself. And sometimes we mentioned earlier that we deal with a lot of people that are natives to wealth, and more so that are immigrants to wealth and don't know it. And some of these different patterns are different among these 2 different groups because of how they've been brought up and what they know, which is really fascinating for us to begin with and should be talked about more often. But spending because you couldn't do it before, really, we find that a lot in that immigrant group, especially those that have also had some level of trauma preventing that, right? That ability to spend, right? They perhaps maybe had inherent tragedies at play, right? Where they didn't have the money, they were in poverty, they were in situations. That's where a lot of that kind of comes from, and we see it quite often. And so what will happen is there's a lot of reasons as to why people spend money and what money means to them, and none of those are wrong. It's just a matter of to what degree do you take them, and what does it mean to you that can make them wrong. And so quite often we do see people that will spend, and when asked about it, it's because they didn't have it before. And I get it. And I'm so sorry that that was a situation in the past. The problem is the tragedy is a lot of times that keeps them where they were in the past, even though they didn't have to be there. The other one that Tim mentions that we do see quite a bit, and is fascinating, is now that you have it, don't want to lose it. We see this maybe more actually among the native people to wealth that we speak about than the immigrants. But if anybody worries the most about their money, it's those that have it. And it's just because you just don't want to feel what it might feel like to be without it. It makes a lot of sense, but it could be a very destructive thing, because maybe it's because you save too much, you don't spend stuff, or it alters your life pattern, and it allows you to create so much more stress that isn't needed just out of fear. Fear is a huge motivator in creating these tragedies, on top of that. So, any other thoughts on that?
I don't have any thoughts, but I was just gonna, the one thing that I know we have to mention to listeners is just more of like who to follow, impact awareness. Like we always talk about research and understanding. It's like, well, where should I go? Right. That's always next logical question. And just a few that we had written down, and there's multiple, but these are some really good ones. I'm just looking at one more. So we have Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky. They are the forefathers of behavioral finance. A mathematician and a psychologist get together, and they did some wonderful things as a couple in that realm. Really, really great. Like I mentioned, Danny Kahneman, Think Fast and Slow. There's plenty of books out there on those two. Please read them. Really great behavioral. Richard Thaler is kind of like the son of Amos and Danny, has done a lot of continued work on behavioral economics on top of those two, and has expanded the research on it. Robert Schiller does
would be an example.
Yeah, Misbehaving. Yeah, Misbehaving is a great book that goes over like Richard Thaler's overall work. It's really good. It's a long one, but it's good. Robert Schiller, Irrational Exuberance, Narrative Economics, like just the overall drive, like how we function, how it affects the markets more so than just behavioral, like before, like behavioral side on the financial planning. Really, really good work. Well known. Michael Kitces, or Nerd's Eye View, that's just a planner within our space who has been blogging for a long time. I really do think he's a game changer within our space and what he's done for advisors. His information is more advisor driven, but it's still really good if you want to read it. And then another one is Annie Dukes. She wrote Thinking in Bets. Fantastic book. There's another book that she just wrote that I haven't read yet that came out recently. I can't remember the title, but it's in the similar. It's more decision thinking and decision making. And then also Dan Ariely, I believe is how you say that. So he wrote Predictably Irrational. He's kind of on that Richard Thaler bent when it comes to behavioral economics. So also really, really good. But those are just a few. Pick up their books, start reading about it. If you're like me, you're going to go down the rabbit hole and you'll be happy that you did it. So overall, but that's just some people who you should follow, think about, and all that fun stuff. But Dan, if you want to go with your final thoughts quick, then we can close this thing up and put a nice bow on it.
Great suggestions, Tim. Final thoughts. I guess I've got two thoughts in my head. One of which is, and I think this goes out to two groups: those who have experienced a lot of these inherent tragedies, and those who have not, but are struggling with a lot of the concepts we just spoke about. Maybe somewhat aware. To those who have dealt with inherent tragedies, I'm just deeply sorry that you have had to experience a lot of that. You couldn't do anything about it, right? And so don't beat yourself up about it, right? Stop being hard on yourself because those things have come into play. I hope that you have found those resources to be in a different situation, and I hope those resources have also found you, and to keep in mind then where those roots have come from, so that if indeed you're getting yourself into a place that can have a better quality of life, to keep in mind some of the things we've talked about. You can't avoid all of these, you're not going to, but just try to work at that self-awareness so that you can properly utilize the things that you can now utilize. And for those of you who are past that stage or were never there to begin with, I I think especially like I mentioned, like being born in this country is a huge advantage. To try not to take for granted some of these things and use that effort to really focus on what's important to you and nobody else. Your family, sure, but inside that wall to really hone in on this component. And I'll lastly just say, money conversations, they're never really about money. Money's not about money. It's about things like this.
I mean, I could talk about this subject for days, to be very honest. And I think that the thing that I want to boil it down to is I really like, again, the research paper that I mentioned about financial vulnerability. And what I love about it is that it calls out that just because you have a lot of money does not mean that you're financially vulnerable. And I think that's exactly what Dan and I are trying to say here, is that the lack of awareness and the potential lack of financial literacy, which is not necessarily anyone's fault, right? That has to do with school system, how we're taught finance, the taboo that comes across in our culture in the United States. There's a lot of reasons and to it. But what I would say is ask somebody about it, get an objective opinion, create some type of awareness, because that awareness can allow you to be optimizing and be aware of what you're doing, which it could mean that you are guilt-free about your spend. It could mean that you understand exactly what you're spending. It could mean that you're achieving your goals in a quicker and better manner. And it could just create a lot of financial ease. It is amazing to watch what happens with our clients when their financial stress decreases. They overall become more happy. I think Dan mentions this all the time. One of the biggest leaders to divorce is financial stress and financial unawareness or communication among couples. It does not need to happen. That is a tragedy in itself, because you can be educated if you're willing to be educated about the certain subject. And I will admit, I am not saying that our industry is the best. Dan and I talk about all the time. We do not love our industry, but with where the industry is going today and what we are talking about, if your advisor is not talking about this, maybe you should be looking for somebody different, because they should be talking about this, because this is financial. This is part of your financial picture. The emotions are part of it. Like Dan said, it's never about the money. It really comes down to other objects. And being aware of that allows you to be better and more optimizing of your money, which leads to a better life, which leads to success. So it's just something that is extremely important to know. So with that being said, thank everybody for listening to us two talk about tragedies. It may not have been William Shakespeare, but we're trying our best to get to that degree. So thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful night. Thank you for taking the time to start your journey of thinking differently and listening to LBW talk about stuff they love. Until next time.